Taste of Dragons Gaming Podcast. We eat sandwiches and play games. Taste of Dragons Gaming Podcast. A podcast for everyone's day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Taste of Dragons, the Toddcast, the video game podcast that all you capsuleers listen to. And this week, we talk games preservation with a very special guest. The news is excellent. And finally, we got a whole lot of Dragons of the Week this week. Frank Sifali, Kelsey Lewin, Norm Caruso, Pat Contry, Rachel Weil, and Dustin Hubbard.
That's what I'm talking about.
It's a whole lot. We're making up for lost time, y'all.
It's a whole brood.
And as always, my name is Brian.
My name is Troy.
And I am Joe.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, we're missing a couple people, but we have a very special guest this week.
That's right, audience. On the episode today, we are joined by the host of the Still Loading podcast, which is a bi-weekly deep dive into many sides of gaming culture, including video game history. But not just that, he's also a video game collector himself, a super proud dad of a 1-year-old, and so much more. Please welcome to the podcast, Josh Covel.
Hello. Thank you so much for that wonderful intro. I do have to correct you already. It is a weekly podcast now. It's no longer bi-weekly.
Goodness.
Wow.
Stepping it up.
Yeah. I know.
Well done.
I've been actually going weekly, I want to say, since summer of last year, late spring last year.
Oh,
yeah.
And which is impressive because as we mentioned, you are a new father. And so I was like, all right, you're probably going to, take things at a good pace, but you're like, nah, let's pick it up. Let's pick up the pace. Let's make this happen.
It's a lot of work, but it's become one of my favorite things to do by far. I guess taking care of a kid is cool, being a dad and all that. But I love doing the show. So thank you so much for having me on. I've been looking forward to this all week.
Our pleasure.
Absolutely. And yeah, as per usual, I have a opening question, but this one's geared specifically towards Josh.
Oh, wow.
Ooh.
I'm scared. Okay.
All right. No big question. It's fine. Just, what's your favorite video game of all time?
Oh my gosh.
How could you
Brian,
do this to
why
him?
Goodness.
Hey, I said it's no pressure, man. It's not like this is going to be on the internet forever. It's fine. It's not like a definitive thing.
Of all time.
All time. What do you like to do? What is it, something that you just enjoy? Is it like your Shawshank Redemption of video games? What is it?
This is the worst answer in the world. I don't have one. I legitimately don't have, and I'm not saying that as a cop-out. I genuinely don't have one because there is just too many games to pick, and they're too different. Like, every game is too different from the other. Like, the best way I can describe it is I go through phases of a game that I'm obsessed with.
Okay.
Right now, I'm really digging Kirby in the Forgotten Land.
Nice.
Kirby's out there eating cars and stuff.
I've been really liking that, even though I only really play it like once a week. I've been really liking that. Earlier this year, I was sucked into Persona 3, completely hooked on Persona 3.
Nice, oldie but a goodie.
And if you would have asked me, like, probably at the late 2020, early 2021, it would have been Ghost of Tsushima. Like, favorite game of all time easily. Like, it just switches. Like, I don't have a favorite game of all time because generally what it would have been probably would have been Ocarina of Time. But now, controversial opinion, that game bores me to tears now because I played it too much.
It's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, we know where everything is. There's no surprises anymore.
That's pretty much it. And also, like, I don't think it's aged as well as the internet wants you to believe it has.
And if I'm being honest, I am more of a fan of Majora's Mask. Given the opportunity right now to play one of those two games, I'm going Majora's Mask. That's just where I'm at.
Same.
Yeah.
I honestly think it's just because, like, I haven't played Majora's as much, and it feels like there's still so much more to explore. That at Majora, like, it's one of those things because there's that time limit, and you have every villager kind of works on their own time schedule. You almost feel like there is always something you can find in this villager's daily life. Like, you can explore the daily lives of these villagers, and there's always something different and unique that you might not have noticed the first time. And that's why I find it more enjoyable than, like, Ocarina has a ton of content too, but I played it too much. And now, because of the rabid fan base of that game. I'm kind of over it.
It's like, how many awards can it get? I mean, come on, Ocarina. You're gonna get Game of the Millennia. You're gonna be Game of the Year. You're gonna be Game of, I don't know,
of our hearts.
Time.
Game of Time, I think, is what it's waiting for.
Yeah,
when
I
it gets
think
that
so.
one, it will
Yeah.
finally retire itself.
I think so. It's interesting, though, because Majora's Mask is the one that's on a time loop, but Ocarina of Time is the other one.
Well, and
It's interesting.
My one friend pointed this out. Ocarina of Time is a fairly, it's a little too close to Link to the Past in terms of structure.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
But
a lot close. Yeah.
It's,
I mean,
it's
a
you
lot
know,
of those
you
games have that
an
kind of
intro,
formula.
like you have an intro couple of temples, and then then the world changes, and you can switch back and forth between the changed worlds, and then there's like a larger number of temples for you to explore, and
Yeah.
the funny thing is like while I am semi-criticizing Ocarina of Time, I played Ocarina of Time first, like before Link to the Past. Like I didn't have a Super Nintendo growing up, so like I loved Ocarina. I remember taking it to because I was the one who loved video games. I was in charge at my church of bringing video game consoles to like church picnics for kids to play, like all the multiplayer stuff.
well, preaching the real word, the good word out there.
The good word of Zelda.
Preaching
I'm
the good
pretty
Zelda
sure
word.
I brought GoldenEye, which is a little weird to bring to a church gathering, or just
That's fine.
shoot your friends. It'll
Jesus
be fine.
would be down.
Teamwork. It was
Yeah,
teaching
yeah.
him teamwork. Each of you took a turn making sure you looked at everybody else's screens. It was fine. It was teamwork.
Pretty much. But then I would also still bring single player games. So I would literally bring Ocarina of Time and just play it in front of people.
You were catching up on your game time. That's what you were doing.
I would only play it when no one else was at the station, but it was, oh man, the video game obsession ran deep. I would bring it and then not hang out with any other kids there. I would just stay at the video game station all day.
It was like me at a sleepover. It was just like, yeah, you guys all do that. What video game system do you have here?
Pretty
Wait,
much.
you would go over to a friend's house, like they invite you over for a sleepover.
Yeah.
They're like watching a movie, and then you're just like, I'm good, in like their dad's office playing.
Hey, they knew
like,
what they got when
Myst.
they invited me.
You're hacking into their computer, figuring out where all the games
I
are.
turned to them. I'm in.
Well, that's like, what is it? I would actually, my neighbors growing up, I only wanted to spend time with them because they had a Sega Genesis and the other neighbor had a PlayStation, and I didn't have any video games at the time, and I was obsessed with it.
Shout out to the neighbors who had systems for those of us
Yeah.
kids who didn't.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm in the same boat. My best friend, he was the one that got the N64 and like the PlayStations when they were coming out. But my parents were like, "You got a Nintendo, you're good. Like, don't ask for too much.
You don't need another Nintendo.
Yeah, you already have one. It's good. It's still working." So yeah, definitely. I remember a lot of stolen nights going over to my neighbor's house to just be like, "Let's play 64." Of which Ocarina was there, and not a good game to play at a friend's house.
It is not.
Because it's like, it's a single player. You have to
Yeah.
invest time in it. It's not like, hey, let's just boot this up and just have some fun for a couple hours. I mean, it's still fun to watch, but it's not a multiplayer fun game like the wrestling games of old, or even I don't know. There was also like NFL Blitz, I think, was out
yeah.
for that
Yeah,
system
yeah.
at the time, and GoldenEye, things like that. Perfect Dark. So Ocarina always kind of fell to the deep, but I did end up actually playing Ocarina of Time when I was an adult because, as I just mentioned, I didn't have a 64 because my parents were just like, what? But Link to the Past is, if you were asking me one of my favorite games, it would be a Link to the Past for the Super Nintendo. I played that ad nauseum. I played that traditionally. I played that yearly, weekly, like it was ingrained in my blood. So when I was an adult and I could finally play an emulation of Ocarina of Time, this is when the Wii had like
This was like their Master Quest one. When
yeah, where
they
they had like the virtual console.
Yeah.
Not even the Master one. It was just a
Oh,
port.
you mean actually the virtual console for the Wii?
The virtual console for the
Oh,
Wii,
right.
you could go back and play these 64 games, and I saw Ocarina there, and I was like, finally, 10 years in the making, I can finally play this game. And it was because it was like Link to the Past. Like, you're right, it's pretty much the same. Like Light World, Dark
it's
World,
very
all
similar.
that stuff. Because it was, though, it hit me right in my nostalgia in all the right ways because like I wasn't playing Link to the Past anymore, and here's this new game, but it was new and old at the same time. And I was just like, oh, I get it. I get why people are just like flabbergastedly in love with this game. Yeah, that was just me at 21. You know, as you do when you're in college.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for answering my question. Yeah, because it is one of those things where it's just like, what is it? Is it the one that I always like to just have fun with every now and then? Is it the one that that I think is a masterpiece? And I don't even if I only played it once, it's still an amazing game. The one time I played. So yeah, I love everybody's different answers to that.
I love making lists with video games. I'm currently making a list of the last 10 years of gaming since I've reviewed everything I've played.
Oh yeah, that's right.
To try and see what is my top 10 for the past 10 years.
Oh, that's great.
It's been fun. I've been using numbers to help, using math. Ugh.
Oh, it's beautiful.
But it's interesting because like you said, you've chronicled your last 10 years of gaming.
Yeah.
So do you go off of your thoughts back then, or do you go off of reflecting and what you have played after that?
It's totally reflective. I go off of what I wrote back in the day when I would review point review stuff, and then I go, okay, well, what got a high review then? Let me re-look at that and see how it stands now in my head against the rest of the things that
I have a challenge for all you guys then, something that you could maybe even turn into a little mini segment that goes on. I did a thing on Instagram, and Troy, I believe you followed this, the 30 days of video games.
Oh, yeah.
And each day was a different prompt. So, for example, day 1, your very first video game. Day 2, your favorite character. Day 3, a game that's underrated. Day 4, a guilty pleasure game. And
gotcha.
I would love to hear from everyone. If you do that prompt and weekly, you just do a different one. So first week, it'll be you all go around as your favorite video game. Second week is your favorite character. You could do a 30 weeks of video games or something like that. And, see where that takes you. But it goes all the way up. You have saddest game scene, best gameplay,
oh gosh,
gaming system of choice, favorite antagonist, favorite protagonist.
Gotcha.
There's a whole bunch. If you guys are interested, I could send you the full list. And in fact, I'm not going to do it yet, but I have a second round of 30 days of video games with different prompts as well.
Nice.
Heck
Yeah. The saddest scene would just be Troy just reliving every single video game he's ever played.
Every video game is sad when you think about it.
It is.
Because they're all so meaningful. Think about the work people put into it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for answering that question. So now let's get into instead of a game this week, we're actually going to talk some game preservation.
Yeah. Josh, I remember a while ago I was listening to one of your podcasts where you went pretty deep into the realm of game preservation and talking about the video game history foundation. And I found it really, really fascinating as someone who doesn't necessarily collect games. You kind of awakened an importance that I hadn't really thought about, the idea of some of these games falling to the wayside or being forgotten or just simply not being preserved. And I know at that time when I listened to the podcast, you were talking to someone who was very, very deep into it, and you were kind of burgeoning into the idea. You're already a collector yourself. So I just wanted to ask you, first of all, how would you describe video game preservation, and what's your relation with it these days? How did you come upon it?
So video game preservation is kind of it's hard to define because let's go with the easy parts to define. First of all, I said this in the episode, and I think it's a really good way to kind of break down all the different facets of video game preservation. There's essentially 3 pillars of video game preservation. You have physical preservation, you have digital preservation, and you have cultural preservation or contextual preservation.
Yes.
Physical preservation is kind of what Joe, Brian, and myself do. We have a crap load of collectibles and games, and it's not even necessarily just the games themselves. It's the paraphernalia, it's the peripheral stuff, it's the extra stuff that is not necessarily the game itself. And I have a bunch of BioShock Infinite collector stuff, different pins from all the different vigors and stuff like that, and things along those lines. But it's not necessarily just physical preservation, it's also digital preservation. Digital preservation is just the act of storing games digitally or storing your game history digitally, whether that's scans of magazines that you could keep physically, but that will deteriorate no matter how well you keep it. Digital can preserve that. So they have, you can digitally preserve things, make scans of things, take photos of boxes and from every different angle possible and store it digitally that way. Just find some way to show what it was like, even if you don't have the physical object anymore. And finally is contextual preservation, which is arguably the most important because I did an episode last summer called Tales from the Island that both Brian and Joe were on. And the whole idea of it was when people look at Animal Crossing New Horizons in 30 years, are they going to know how important that game was to the people of the world during the 2020 pandemic? Well, the current pandemic, but the specifically during 2020 when the pandemic started and when that game came out. Like if you look at a cartridge and you play that game, you're not going to understand all the context around it, how people literally had birthday parties on each other's islands and celebrated holidays on each other's islands and found ways to connect with different people on their respective islands that never would have happened otherwise. And it was a way for friends to stay connected to each other and kind of have that sense of normalcy because you could create your own living space and invite your people into your living space digitally. It was a fake one, but it was still a digital living space that you created and you can invite your friends to it. And that's kind of where contextual preservation is important because you don't get that if you just have a copy of the game. Like you're missing all of that. And even if you take out the cultural aspects of it, even if you just look at some of the legal aspects of it, like if you look at like a game like Donkey Kong, for example, Nintendo got sued for that game by Universal because Universal thought that it was too similar to King Kong. And the way Nintendo won that lawsuit, this is another doubly important because it creates a video game later on, which I'll get into. But the lawyer for Nintendo argued that, this is garbage because, Universal, you got sued for this originally, and Universal won that it was public domain. So when they sued Nintendo, Nintendo's like, well, if it's public domain, even if this was a copyright issue, which it's not, you can't sue us because it's public domain. And the lawyer won that argument won that legal case for Nintendo, and his name was Jack Kirby. Only then he becomes the namesake of Kirby.
Our favorite pink ball. So I think it was Jack Kirby. I'm going to double check that because it wasn't Jack Kirby also a comic book artist.
Yes. Jack the King Kirby.
Yeah.
Creator of the Fantastic Four with Stanley.
Maybe his first name is his first name is Herbie, not Jack.
It's John Kirby.
Oh my gosh. His name
We're just hoping.
It was
Kirby
John
Kirby.
Kirby. That's who it was, not Jack
There we
Kirby.
go, that's
I was
right.
confusing
Yeah,
it
that's
with I was going to say, I'm like, Jack Kirby I know is from comic books. There can't be two important people named Jack Kirby that both had long-lasting stamps on two incredibly important mediums, but it was close. Very, very close.
That is very close. I love how Nintendo takes names from just people they know.
Yeah.
Like just like with Mario was from their landlord. Hey, our lawyer was really good. Cool. Let's name a character after him.
I mean, we're not going to pay him royalties for that, but
No, of course not. They have the honor of the name though. And that's what matters.
He's a lawyer. He already makes enough money. He's fine.
True. That's true.
I think that that contextual preservation is super important because especially with an art form that's interactive where you're going to be getting such varying experiences and not just how you perceive those experiences. Like, with movies and books and whatnot, you're going to be reading the same words and then you have your opinion and how it feels to you. You can express that. But with video games, you may not actually see the same things that someone else saw while playing this game to its completion. And with that, like, how do you tell those stories? How do you preserve that those different experiences? And it's about sharing with them, and recording them and writing them down into articles or whatnot. And I think that is a fascinating journey to take part in, to go on.
And that's why it's so hard to actually preserve video games in a sense, like in its entirety, because everyone's experience is going to be so different and so unique. Like when you go see a movie, everyone has the same experience. People may feel different emotions from the movie, but the experience itself does not change.
Yep.
However, I mean, you can maybe go see a movie in a theater versus being at home, and that changes the experience of watching it. But the storyline is going to be the same every time. The events, the shots, like everything's going to be the same every time. Same thing for when reading a book. Same thing for when listening to music. Like it's a stationary static medium that once something is created, unless they go back and redo it, which you kind of see that now with with all the digital stuff now. Like they'll take out episodes of TV shows, or they'll digitally remove things from TV shows, or you just pull a George Lucas and ruin everything.
He really believed in the CGI. He
believed
in the CGI,
really did,
and the CGI wanted to believe in him.
I still say that I think George Lucas is really good at setting up worlds and plot lines. He just has no idea how to write dialogue. I think he actually said, like, if you look at all the plot lines of the prequels, I feel like it actually is like some solid storytelling in terms of like the point to point, but the transitions to those points are ludicrous.
Okay, I have some very strong feelings about this, and I agree, but this would be an entirely different podcast to do. But I think I need to point out the reason that some of those things are really good is because they are directly taken from other things, and he didn't know how to sew them together. And I'm done.
Are you talking about like and you talking about the original movies directly taking from other things, or in the prequels?
His influences,
his influences, his storylines, the way they were shot, the way characters were drawn, the way they were created, their outfits they were wearing. A lot of it is homage to other things that he loved.
The original Star Wars, like the Hidden Fortress from Akira Kurosawa or something like that?
Oh,
that is one of the many movies of Kurosawa's specifically that he, yes.
But that's the thing though, like you said, like even though movies is all the same every single time, video games are just different every single time you play them. Like even people who play them professionally, like they speed run them. This is what they do. Even if it's like a 10-minute speed run of a game, it's different every single time. There's no one way you're ever going to see the game. It's just going to be a new experience every single time. And I love that about video games.
And it's super important too, because like those experiences, while important, it's like you can't capture everyone's experience. It's physically impossible. Like it would be literally impossible to capture every single person's experience. And that's when you kind of get into curation of preservation, where it's like, well, what things do you preserve, what things don't you preserve? And the answer is like everything and nothing. Like there's no right answer as to what you should preserve and what you shouldn't. And some of the Video Game History Foundation, which spoiler alert, is the part of some of the Dragons of the Week, which we'll get into later on. They do a great job at trying to like they're very open and candid about like how they decide to preserve things, and they're like, well, we don't know if like this means nothing to us, but it might be important later on, so we don't know, so we're going to preserve it because it doesn't seem important, but that doesn't mean it's not important, because we have no idea what's going to be needed 20, 30 years down the line, and like what is still important to people when they're doing research on video games. But even then, they talk about like how hard it is to preserve, especially the games we have now, the games as a service. Like, how do you preserve Fortnite?
Yeah.
The game that, 3 years ago, the game is nothing like what it is now. There wasn't even it? There was only one map 3 years ago, right? And now there's two or something. I've never played Fortnite. You can tell
the map has changed, or
it also started out as a completely different game. It started out as just a crafting game survival game, and then they branched out and did this battle royale because of DayZ, and then it just blew up.
And now it is what it is.
And they put in a bunch of dances and said, "We're geniuses.
We're geniuses." And also, we don't owe anybody money.
Take that, Carlton.
Oh, wait, we do? Never mind. Taking them out.
I think with game preservation, I don't think I answered your one question, Troy, of how I got into it specifically. But before I get into it, I think game preservation is just like what it is. It's nebulous. It's everything and nothing. It's hard because it's like there are easy things you can point to, like, oh, if I'm storing a copy of this game, I'm preserving it. And in some way, shape, and form you are. And same thing digitally. I think some of the people who do some of the best work in terms of game preservations are the ones who, and this one isn't a Dragon of the Week, but like Jeremy Parrish of the Retronauts podcast, he's doing a thing called Game Boy World, where he is buying complete in-box copies of Game Boy games, taking out the manuals, photographing the boxes, photographing the manuals, scanning the manuals, photographing the games, playing every one of the games, and doing a little video and a little mini review of each of the games. And you can find it on his YouTube channel if you search Jeremy Parrish.
Nice.
That's so cool.
And like you can watch, he's done tons and tons and tons of them. There's so many out there. He has a podcast feed, a video podcast feed. So you could probably find that on, I think it's called Video Works is what he's calling it. But he started doing stuff where like he started looking down the NES rabbit hole, and then all of a sudden he's like, well, if I want to like look at the context of the NES, I should also look at what Sega did in Japan at the same time, because Famicom and the SG-1000, for those who don't know, the SG-1000 is the original Sega Master System, sort of. There was the SG-1000, then the SG, I think, 2000, and the SG Mark III. And Mark III is what we got as Sega Master System. So Sega actually had 2 consoles out, but only in Japan, that came out before the Sega Master System in the US. So he goes back and he starts looking at all the SG-1000 games and determining and like looking at all those, so that way he can really get a full idea of the context of when he's looking at a Famicom game from 1983. How does that compare to an SG-1000 game from 1983? And they actually came out on the same date, which is kind of crazy to think about, the SG-1000 and Famicom.
So happy that there are people doing this good work out there, and I can see how that kernel of like, hey, I want to record and archive this little piece of history will then lead you to the next piece of history. It leads you to the next piece of history. It leads you to like this whole you open up this bag
this
and there's
Pandora's
just so much more in
box
there.
Of video game preservation.
And I love that there are people out there making that happen. And makes me feel real real lazy. I'm just like, I just play them and then put them down and then talk about it.
Well, what you guys do is also a type of preservation. It's the cultural preservation you're talking about. It's not even necessarily just your opinions either. By sharing like kind of like news, and also like one of the reasons I love your guys' podcast is that you don't do just news. Like I'm so tired of video game news podcasts because they're everywhere.
Right.
What I like about your guys' show is that you have a different way of looking at video games, and you'll either do reviews, you'll do like the Dragons of the Week is a brilliant idea because it shares your love of video games, and it gives a little bit of each of your personalities too by who's choosing the Dragon of the Week. But it's like this, like podcasting itself, and this isn't to fluff any of us up or sound like braggy, but like it is a type of preservation. Like when you're podcasting about video games, you're giving some level of cultural context to video games, whether it's a retrospective of an old game that you're playing for the first time. You're covering the context of like how a game has aged in terms of like, does it hold up still under modern scrutiny type of thing.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, kind of everything it can be considered a form of cultural preservation. Because like sometimes I will go back and I will find podcasts from like when the pandemic first started happening. Like if I find a new podcast and I like them, I may go back to be like, how did they deal with this transition? How were they gaming, in that first month? And I find that fascinating, and that is archived. That's there to check out, and I think it's important on a whole that it is. But let's switch over to some physical preservation. You talked a little bit about it with Retro Game Knots.
Oh, Retronauts.
Yeah. Thank you. You talked a little bit of Retronauts, where they're actually taking the physical games and then they are digitizing them, so they have an archive.
Retronauts is just a podcast similar to what ours is, like yours and mine is. But Jeremy Parrish is one of the hosts of Retronauts, and he does this whole archiving thing on his own. Like it's away from Retronauts.
Oh, I see, on his own.
But he's one of the hosts of Retronauts.
Okay, gotcha. So I love the fact that he is amassing this collection and then able to take these manuals and these game boxes and then keep them in a place where they won't deteriorate. When it comes to the physical stuff, like how did you get into collecting? Do you remember what was like the first bit of video game that you got or old manual that you're like, ooh, I need to put this someplace. I need to put this on a wall.
Yeah. So actually, real quick, I'll answer 2 questions because I never did answer your question of how I got into preservation, and it was It was Retronauts. It was Retronauts. I'll just give that as a short answer. They had an episode with Frank Sifali, who we're talking about later on, and it just fascinated me. So that's pretty much how I kind of got really interested in it. And I'm not really, other than the podcast, which I don't really consider that much of a preservation thing. Like I know I said it is, and that is true, but I don't really think, I'm not documenting Game Boy games or like Virtual Boy games or anything like that. I'm not scanning in manuals. I'm just talking about games, but and trying to raise awareness for it. I would say that's the closest. But in terms of collecting, how I got into collecting, it's twofold. One, Angry Video Game Nerd.
Really?
I was
YouTube guy, right?
really liked the Angry Video Game Nerd and I still do. I don't watch his stuff nearly as often, but I really like the Angry Video Game Nerd. And back in like 2010, like 2008 or 9 is when I first kind of discovered his channel. And he started talking about things like Sword Quest for the Atari and for talking about all the different NES accessories and like showing all the different, like in the Power Glove and all this other stuff that I had never heard of at the time. And I'm like, holy crap, gaming could do all this back in the 80s. And it blew my mind, just some of the stuff. Like if people haven't heard the Sword Quest story, that I think that's like the crystallizing moment for me. Joe, I'm sure you've heard of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I haven't heard of it.
All right, Troy. Well, buckle up your sit downs. So I got a story for you.
Welcome to the podcast, Troy.
All right, buckles on, helmets going. Let's get the sword.
So Atari back in its heyday, late 70s, early 80s, specifically more in the early 80s, it was raking in so much money. Like it was hand over fist, like obscene amounts of money. They created a game series called Sword Quest, and there's 4 games in total: Earth World, Fire World, Water World, and Air World.
And each one was its own game.
Each one was its own game.
Little MCU.
Yeah.
And they had a tournament. The way it would work is that each game would come with obviously the box and game and manual, but also came with a comic book. And
sweet.
In the comic book, you would play through the game and a random 2 numbers would pop up on screen, and it was a page number and a panel number.
Oh, get out of here.
And inside that panel was a hidden word that you had to find in the comic book panel.
Damn, that's fun.
Once you played through the whole game and got all of the panels and found all of the words, you had to unscramble the sentence because all the words were jumbled up. So you had to unscramble the words and find the hidden phrase. And usually there's like some type of like hint at the beginning of the comic. And usually you would have to unscramble it and use that hint at the beginning to unscramble the sentence. And the comic book artists were no slouches either. I think George Perez, who I think he passed away recently, didn't he?
Yeah,
did?
this week.
Yep.
This past week.
This past week.
The comic book artist, right?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. He was a unbelievable, brilliantly wonderful force in the world. He was just a great person and a really amazing comic artist and writer.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it's kind of timely we're bringing it up then because he was the artist for the Sword Quest games. I forget who else worked on the comic books. Oh, Jerry Conway and Roy Thomas. And besides George Perez, Dick Giordano also did the artwork.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Sorry, he inked it. He inked it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So those 4 were all involved in the comic book. So big names in the comic book industry, right? And so after you would unscramble those words, after finding all the hidden words in all the panels, you would submit it into Atari. And all the winners would come together for one final competition, one final level.
What?
And whoever won that would win a prize. Now,
holy crap.
the prize at the time, I don't know what it is. I think
an actual sword.
Adjusted for inflation. You're not wrong, actually. You said sword, right?
Just a 7-year-old
Yeah,
little
he said
sword.
sword.
Yeah, no,
So the
fully sharpened.
The prizes.
Cleave ahead.
Here you go, kiddo.
I'm gonna read this off because there is no way I would be able to memorize this otherwise.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
There is. Let me see if I can find. I did find the list originally, but it was the prizes weren't just like normal prizes. It was. Each prize was worth $25,000 in 1982 money, mind you. So adjust that for inflation. Right. You're looking at 2 to 3 times the value now, whatever 1982 to current is. The winner of Earthworld, and there was going to be a competition for all 4 of these, right? $25,000 prize for all 4 of these. The winner of Earthworld won a Talisman of Penultimate Truth, which was an 18-karat solid gold disc studded with 12 diamonds and the birthstones of the 12 zodiacs, along with a miniature white gold sword set atop it.
Oh my gosh.
That's the first prize. That's the first prize. The winner of Fireworld won the Chalice of Light, a goblet made of platinum and gold studded with diamonds, rubies, sapphires, pearls, and green jade.
That person actually ended up growing up to be Little John.
That's where he got the
that's
goblet.
where he got the
Good
goblet
for
from.
him.
Yeah.
Very big Atari player.
Oh, absolutely. He was really good.
The winner of Waterworld won the Crown of Life, a solid gold crown decorated with diamonds, rubies, sapphires, and aquamarines.
Was there just a gold sale happening at the Kmart that in the 80s? Just buy one, get 3 free? Like, dang.
Then
look at Atari putting in the money.
Atari just had FU levels of money, man. Like they just had
Yeah, they did.
they had
all that
so
Pitfall
much money. They were bought out by Time Warner as well around then, like but either right before then or during then. So like they just had so much money. It was crazy. And then the winner of Air World would get the Philosopher's Stone, a large piece of white jade in an 18-karat gold box encrusted with emeralds, rubies, and diamonds. Now, Troy.
Yeah, you want to win. You want to win.
It gets better.
Yeah.
It gets better.
What are you going to do? Like, what else is there? They're going to encase you in gold.
The 4 winners would come back for one final competition now. They would all reconvene for one final competition to win the Sword of Ultimate Sorcery, which was a silver blade with an
contained
18-karat
actual
gold
magic.
handle covered with diamonds, emeralds, sapphires, and rubies. And it was valued at $50,000 at the time of the competition.
Whoa,
Yeah.
wow,
They
wow,
also
wow.
became the Avatar.
With then,
They mastered
with
all
that
4 elements.
sword,
Yeah.
you attack the rest of the winners, take all their goblets, put them on, and then become a god.
Now,
The Atari god.
No. You
just
become
get power.
Ganon.
You
This
become
is how happens.
That's Ganon's origin story.
It is.
Big Atari player, just like Little John.
there's a direct line between Lil Jon and Ganon. We all knew it.
Oh,
Ganon.
absolutely.
It was just right underneath the surface. But no, so here's the sad part. Right around after the second competition, Atari pretty much went under. It was the 1983 North American game market crash. Be very clear.
yeah.
The game market the game market did not crash outside of North America for the most part, but North America just got destroyed. So Atari never held the 3rd and 4th competitions. In fact, so much so, while the first 2 games did get commercial releases, this 3rd game technically did, but it was by mail order from Atari's magazine. So that already decreased the amount of people who get it.
Oh.
And then the 4th one never existed.
They just never made it.
All of these prizes are confirmed to exist. In fact, the first prize, the disc, the gold, I totally blanked
the disc with the sword on
talisman.
top.
That no longer exists because the person smelted it down. I'm sure the rubies are all still there, but the talisman's gone. The chalice, so far as people know, still exists. Like the winner of that still has it, or like either sold it or something. But it still is in physical. It's still intact. The 3rd and 4th prizes, the crown people believe got awarded, but no one really knows to who. And then the 4th prize just never got awarded, and so also the sword never got awarded. But no one really knows what happens to the other prizes that didn't get awarded. When Atari went under, no one has been able to find him since. So there's a lot of conspiracy theories over, like, it wasn't the dude who owned Warner at the time. Does he have it? Does Jack Tramiel, who was like, I think he was there at the time. I'm totally forgetting it now, but
This sounds like a real-life Dungeons & Dragons quest to go assemble these artifacts.
Yeah, this sounds like an episode of Carmen Sandiego.
Right.
Like, that's what this sounds like to me. Like, I feel like, has anybody looked for the sword on the bottom of a lake?
Good question.
That's a
Good
good
question.
Oh, and actually, in speaking of comics, though, there was a comic book series that came out a few years ago that the writer Chris Sims and I forget who else worked on it, basically took that idea of like 2 friends trying to complete the sword quest. Like, they remember doing it as kids. Like, that was the whole angle of the comic book. They remember doing the sword quest stuff as kids. So now they're like years later, and it's a little bit sad, but the beginning of the comic book begins. I haven't even finished it. I only read like a little bit of the first book, but the main character, has terminal cancer.
Whoa.
And so he wants to do this as a way to make himself feel better. Like, this is when he remembers being happy. So he's trying to get all his friends together before he dies of cancer so they can do this sword quest.
Wow.
That's an interesting premise for a comic. Nice.
Yeah. Interesting. That's fascinating on so many different levels. Like, I was already blown away just on the idea that they made a game where you had to use this comic book to actually beat and solve riddles. That is brilliant. That you don't get to see in many games these days. Sometimes you do. But let alone just gold crowns and stuff.
And it's also
Incredible.
interesting too, because like we're talking about games preservation, like if you wanted to play that game now, you also would have to have the comic in order to play it, or at least a scan of it. So somebody, if you want to play it, you have to find both of those things in order to play it. And it's one of those things because, like, and especially back in the day, a lot of games, in order to prevent piracy, they would include something with it that you would have to input into the screen in order to actually play it. Like I know for like Star Control 2, it actually included a map. And it would list coordinates, and you would have to say what it is. Like you would have to tell them what the name of the thing that they're referencing is.
Do you all find that preservation has gotten easier because uploading things and Web 2 is so simple?
Yeah.
Like if I got stuck on a game, I could just Google whatever that sheet is, whatever that comic is, and good chance I may find someone who scanned it somewhere on the internet at some time over the past 10 years.
I mean, even if you look back, a little hint at something being promoted a little bit later on, but like Monkey Island had a call a pirate wheel or dial a pirate wheel, and you had to spin the wheel and match the pirates to different things, and it was a weird way at like so it's like a DRM almost, like to make sure.
It was. It
Wait,
really was.
Was there an
Exactly what it
actual
is.
wheel?
It was a
it
physical
an
wheel
actual,
that
like,
you would
it
spin.
was
I
a
don't know
physical thing.
exactly.
It was.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It was okay. So because Monkey Island, when it had come out, it was Monkey Island 2. I can say for and my own purposes, my first copy of Monkey Island 2 is not a real copy of the game. It was like somebody who had handed me just the disc essentially, or handed me and
The
it was
floppy,
like the floppy for it, and it was just like a demo.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't like the whole game. It was only one piece of the game, and if you
Yeah.
didn't have that wheel, you couldn't play anything more than the first. I want to say the first or the second level.
Wow.
So until I actually got the full game, which came with the disc, that was how they were able to combat the
Piracy.
literally.
Because literally, you could just copy it, and then you were good.
Okay, so here's a question. Controversial question. Like I've played Monkey Islands 1 and 2, but I played the re-releases of them.
Okay.
Where does that fall for you all when it comes to video game preservation? Because it sounds like I'm missing out on like how the game was originally played, but I still have a version of it that's updated and different. Now, granted that you have the original graphics, but you could also have the updated graphics with it. But I'm playing it also on a controller, not a computer. Like, at what point is preservation not actually preserving the original product?
I don't know. For me, I think actually it's still preservation. It's just a different form of it. You're just a different generation that's getting to experience the game. I do feel like having people to talk to that were from the time that did play it is even more. It just gives a little more like, I don't know what it is about it. There's just something fun to hear. Like you played it and you probably still had a great time. It probably meant something completely different. Like Ocarina is a great example of this. It means something completely different for people playing it now because every game that they've played since then is 10 times bigger. All the puzzles are harder, and it's not, it's nowhere near the graphical feats that it was.
I don't know. That water temple's pretty hard.
I literally won't continue. I will only play the game up into the water temple and then I stop. I will not go anywhere there. I'm not wasting time in that temple ever again.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think that's actually it's still the experience you're having is still preserving a really great game. You're just not having the hardship, or not even hardships. You're just not having the same kind of experience about the materials you're playing with.
Is it okay? Because this is news to me. So as far as I was aware, I played Monkey Island 1.
You did.
But now I kind of feel like maybe I didn't quite.
Well, no, you did. I think the thing is that there's elements that are just impossible to preserve because, like, let's be honest. Like, if you're trying to make a commercial product now, why would you include that dial a pirate thing, except for kicks and giggles?
Yeah.
Like, it would be really cool if they did that. It'd be actually that'd be really freaking cool. But
That'd be really cool,
But
yeah.
in terms of like gameplay, like especially for like digital copies, you can't do that. Like, like especially when you're trying to sell games digitally, there are ways that some games have actually found ways around it. I actually was thinking about this. You ever play Infamous Second Son's Papercraft or Paper Trail?
Yes, I did. What a deep pull you're doing right now.
I just thought
I love it. Holy crap.
that was one of the coolest things ever. I was blown away by that. It was like on the same level of Sword Quest to me not in terms of prizes.
Yeah.
I didn't get $25,000 worth of gold, but it was like you went to this website and you had to actually use real detective skills of like, saying you forgot your login ID and then logging onto like their email that way. It was logging onto an account in different ways. It was crazy.
And I don't quite remember what in Infamous 2 got you there, either like a sign or a text that was like, go to a real site. And when you went there was an entirely mock site that led you down this amazing out of game detective, like just story.
Yeah.
That really kind of, it didn't like, manifest in the larger picture of the game, but kind of helped fill in the world in a way that I thought was brilliant. We were printing things out of the computer. We were folding things, trying to get like this origami like puzzle solved, and like Amanda and I, we both were super invested. And you're right, I haven't done things like that in games, and I was surprised it was there.
It was so cool.
AR adventure.
It was wonderful, and it was something that like that website's not going to be up forever. And that nope. part of that game is permanently gone. No matter, even if like we don't have issues now where like one of my biggest issues now is that like if you buy a game, even take out the whole digital versus physical argument, which is always going to be a raging thing amongst collectors, I'm much more open to digital now because physical is pretty much useless at this point because they're just keys to unlock digital games, and it's heartbreaking.
Oh, like new physical copies of games.
I still buy it.
Yeah.
I still buy new physical because I like the artwork, and it's the same price, so it's not like I'm getting anything like other than the immediacy of having a digital one, which I don't need. Mm-hmm. It's just that to me though, the advent of all the digital stuff is the biggest like boon to game preservation, and also one of the things that it hinders it the most because you have so much now where games can be changed completely or like things taken out completely. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. Because like you said, there's so many day one patches that some games don't even include their ending without a day one patch in order to prevent people from, if they got early copies, they wouldn't be able to leak the ending on it. Or like with Tomb Raider, I think the third one, the day one patch completely changed the ending, or not completely, but it changed the ending. So much so that one guy actually played it completely through and didn't have an internet connection. So he went online and he was like, hey, that ending was really crazy, wasn't it, guys? And everybody's like, what are you talking about, man? And they all were like calling him liars. Like, no, seriously. Like there was a picture of like a dinosaur and like there's a bunch of other stuff. Like, and I was like, what do you think this is going to mean for the next one? And everybody's like, you're lying. No, you're completely lying. He's like, no, I'm really not. And the developers of the game had to come out and be like, okay, the reason why this is because he doesn't have the patch and we patched this out.
How do you preserve a medium that can
completely rewrite its history?
Change like that
can completely erase its history. And what is it, Troy? I've been wanting to do that Assassin's Creed 2 episode with you. I've had to stop it because my Xbox 360 won't connect to the internet right now, and so I lost my save file.
Oh man,
I'm like,
so sorry.
Why? This is like, and Assassin's Creed 2 is not like a new game. Like it's a pretty old game at this point. So I'm blown away by the fact that I can't access my save file because it's connected to my Xbox Live account. I'm like, that is garbage. I'm literally holding back swear words right now because I'm so upset.
Yeah. And then even Mass Effect 3.
Sorry.
Mass Effect 3 completely changed its ending because of how people thought about it. Like, it's interesting how you preserve that or how you don't preserve that or what do you, how do you even talk about that in context?
The best way you can preserve it is news articles and podcasting. That's part of the contextual preservation where you go back and like one of the things that I try to do, I don't do it often because it's a lot of work, but I should do it more often than I do. When I'm doing research on a video game's history, I try to look at news articles and reviews from magazine publications at the time because that really shows what reviewers were thinking in a time and place. And reviews, I feel like your audience probably would already know this, but I feel like it's worth saying anyway. Reviews are linked to a specific time and place and the expectations of that specific time and place. So just because a reviewer loves something or hates something does not mean that they are correct. And it does not mean that you're correct. Your expectations, however you feel about a game at the time is based off your expectations of that at that time. And your expectations are completely directly linked to where you are at currently in your life. So
exactly.
If you look at reviews of Earthbound, one of the most world-renowned JRPGs of all time, it was panned. People hated the graphics. People hated the gameplay. Even though, arguably, there is some mechanics in that game that I really wish RPGs would bring back. Like when, perfect example, when you are so overpowered that enemies don't mean anything to you, when you get into an encounter with them, you don't even have to fight them. It just kills them, gives you like one experience. It's like, we're not going to waste your time with this. We know you could one-shot all of these, so let's just not bother with it. Like, I wish games would do that still.
Yeah, and also, you also have to think about it. reviewers, especially nowadays, they play games completely different than the rest of us.
Yes.
A lot
a
of
bit
them,
of a crunch.
a lot of them are on the crunch. All of them are like, listen, I got to play this game. I only have 3 days to play this, and I don't know how long this is, so I got to just go through it and get done. And some games, the reviewers get a chance to choose, like, oh, sweet, I was looking forward to this. I really want to play this. And other ones are like, hey, listen, you got to review
do this.
Barbie World, and you got 2 days to do it.
Don't you
And
throw
what they
shade on
wanted
Barbie
was to actually
World.
play all of Barbie World.
Exactly.
They're upset
Right.
that the open world Barbie game they can't enjoy because they're too busy having to cram another 40 hours into Elden Ring. Like, why? Who doesn't want to hang out with Barbie?
And then they all get then people get angry at them, like, well, you didn't beat the game, so you can't give an accurate review. I'm like, that's not necessarily true. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that you could give a comprehensive retrospective or deep dive into a game unless you play a game all the way through. But if you're just talking about reviewing it, I think if you've played an 80 hours out of like a 200-hour game, I'm pretty sure you have a good idea if the game is good or not at that point.
And you're giving your experience, whatever or however long that experience was. You're telling your audience or writing what your experience was and whatever it may be. So there's no wrong answer there.
There isn't. And also, especially as we were talking about with day one patches, a lot of these players, actually almost none of them, are playing it with that day one patch. So they're playing it with either outdated systems or glitches or a number of things that could be going wrong. But they also have the companies telling them, don't worry, the day one patch fixes this. So they don't include that. And then if it doesn't fix it, that's still part of their review. And it's very interesting how reviews happen nowadays.
But you're right. It's great to see how that preservation of the context of
Yeah.
the time when those games come out is so important. When I was earlier this year playing through the Halo series for the first time, I fell in love with Halo 2. I was doing a thing every time I beat the game. I would go and then watch a bunch of reviews and just watch what people from back then said about it. And I was surprised that people really hated Halo 2 on a larger scale. It was a cliffhanger ending. That you played as the villains from the first game, which a lot of people were like, "Oh, you're shoving this message down my throat." And in my head, I'm like, "You get to play as Keith David."
Yeah,
What is there not to like?
I love the Arbiter. I love
Come
the Arbiter.
on.
But yeah, absolutely.
But I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't gone and read what the world was kind of like at that time in the mid 2000s. And it's fascinating. It's
Reviews are tied to the expectations of personalities of the journalists at the time that it came out. It means nothing more, nothing less. And you can disagree with a review. You can agree with a review. Years later, you may end up disagreeing. Like, I think another good example, BioShock Infinite, it was critically praised, and then years later, it's kind of soured on a lot of people. I disagree with that personally. I still love the game, but I know there's a growing perception in the public of people who have just kind of soured on it, and it's unfortunate in my opinion, but at the same time, that's just my opinion. I still love the game, but to each their own, of course.
Yeah.
And I completely branched off from completely tangented back from your original question of how I got into collecting. We started with the Angry
that
Video
doesn't
Game
sound
Nerd.
like us at all.
Yeah. Every time we get to see each other, I just see a lovely wall, just this top to bottom of video games, just stacked video game paraphernalia, video game consoles, video game manuals, and I love it. Is there a way you could explain like how big your collection is, or how?
I mean, that's something. Size doesn't matter, Troy. You should. I mean,
gosh.
no.
So, okay, I'll keep that in mind.
So I guess I have over 1,000 games in my collection that I know. I know it's higher than that. I don't know exactly how much more because I'm lazy with cataloging, because there's a lot in here. But I got into it because of Angry Video Game Nerd, and also at my local library at a used book sale, I found I want to say Tecmo Bowl,
Nice.
and
Love
a
that game.
boxed copy of the original Sonic the Hedgehog, and I paid $1 for each of them, so $2 total.
Bargain.
I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I like video games, and I like, I like they're $1, so why not? Blah blah blah. And it just kind of went from there. And then as I discovered AVGN stuff and learning about the history of things, I'm like, whoa, this is actually really interesting. I would love to get my hands on some of this just to say I have it and try some of these out to see if they still work. Like I would say, for a perfect example, I'm not going to go pick it up and grab it, but I have a Sega Pico or Pico. I think it's a Pico.
Pico.
Which
I have no idea what that is.
Troy,
What is
you
a Sega
would
Pico?
love it.
Yeah.
It's not. I don't. It's more of an edutainment system
I'm even more on board.
than anything else. But basically, this came out in like 92, I want to say. I don't know the exact year, but it's early 90s, pre 95 for sure. And you it's a normal AV cables. You plug it into your TV, but it's a touch screen that you can, and it's a storybook. Like the cartridges are literally storybooks. Like there's a cartridge bottom and a storybook top, and they're all connected. And you plug the cartridge into this almost suitcase looking thing, and you open it up, and as you flip the pages, what happens on the TV changes to what's on the page because it can recognize when you flip the page, and then.
Wow. So the book is both a game and like a controller?
Well, there's a little
for
pen.
the game that's happening on screen?
There's a pen with a button on it, and you use that as a touch screen, essentially. Like whatever you press down and you press a button. So you click on things with the pen and you kind of poke them, and it'll interact with it. And what you click on the book, the TV will react to. So, for example, there's a Busy World of Richard Scarry one, and you can click on Mr. Frumble, and he will
Mr.
maybe
Frumble.
drive off in his car or something like that. There's also an Echo the Dolphin Jr. game, if you're so interested.
In the same vein. Wow.
Then they have I have a handful. I have a Pocahontas one. I have Mickey's Blast Off to the Past. I have Math Antics with the 101 Dalmatians.
Quick question about
Yes.
Pocahontas. Did you ever figure out how to paint with the colors of the wind?
It is the Great
that book?
Riverbend Adventure, so maybe.
Maybe. Okay, well,
All right.
we'll have to find out.
we'll
We'll
take
have to
Actually,
play
I
and
think
find
there
out.
is a
take it.
painting application at the end of it. I think the last page is like a
There you
painting
go.
application. I'm 90% certain.
Answer solved.
And in Japan,
Question
there's Sailor
solved.
Moon games for the Pico
Yes, there are.
or Pico.
The reason I think it's called the Pico is because of Japan.
That would make sense because the I is pronounced like an E,
But-
so it would be Pico.
Yeah. But you know what? I would bet here it was Pico or
Probably.
like Picturo.
Oh.
So it was probably what probably was something
Wow.
like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's fantastic.
It's one of the
That's
coolest things
fantastic.
I've ever heard about. I'm like, how is this this is from the 90s and you're telling me it's a touchscreen that interacts and it knows when you flip the pages, so the kids can flip a page and they'll see it change up on the screen. It's so cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So
And what was this, around the 90s, you think?
yeah, it was
Yeah,
the early
this-
90s.
yeah, early
I can
90s.
look up
Early 90s?
Yeah.
I can look up the date
That's
for
awesome.
you specifically.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
don't need facts on this podcast, sir. What are you doing here?
No, that's why we have him on, to bring some facts. Someone's got to have them.
It's not us.
Released in Japan in 1993, June 93, and in North America in November 94.
Nice.
Awesome. Would you say that is probably like the rarest thing you have, or the thing that you're like, whoa, I've got something super special here or unique?
Definitely not the rarest, but it's definitely one of the ones that I like to talk about the most because I think it's one of the more interesting ones. Rarest, I would have to say I have a copy of the original Persona.
Okay.
Not complete necessarily. It has the front art for the jewel case, the manual, and the disc, but it's missing the back art of the jewel case.
Nah.
My brother got it at a yard sale. Don't know what happened to the other stuff, so there's that. And then I also have a game for the NES that's worth a decent amount called SCAT, and I'm not making that up. It stands for Special Cybernetic Attack Team.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought it meant.
Exactly.
Totally.
Totally.
I wasn't
Yeah,
thinking
yeah,
anything
yeah.
else.
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking anything else.
Not at all. Not at all. All right.
That's super special.
Yeah,
Well, thank
well-
you so much for taking us down those three avenues. Video game preservation, brother.
That's right. Thank you. And then, news. I'm just going to do one little fun one because I think it's amazing. And so for the news, what I have is an amazing collaboration has happened in the world of video games.
Do tell.
I mentioned on here before, many different collabs before, Fortnite and Street Fighter, Fortnite and Coachella, Fortnite and, you do get it. You get it. A lot of collaborations
yeah.
been going on. But nothing has gone together quite as well as EVE Online and Microsoft Excel. Name a more iconic duo. I dare you. I dare you.
I don't know where this is.
Jay and
what's
Silent
right.
Bob.
No, it's still not as iconic as Microsoft
Chewbacca
Excel
and Han.
and EVE Online.
Sonic and Tails.
Pinky in the brain.
You're all still
That's
wrong.
got to be it.
You're all still wrong. You don't realize how powerful this union is because EVE Online has actually been called Spreadsheets in Space.
right.
And so, the reason why we're talking about this is because over the last weekend, Eve Fan Fest finally happened, the first one since 2019. And this happens in Reykjavik, Iceland, where Eve Online is based, or the development team is. And so, this happened. The guy's on stage and he's like, no, it's not an April Fool's joke, guys. This is actually really happening. And everybody's like, really, what does this mean? What it means is you can actually export your data from the game directly into an Excel type format. You can filter things inside the game and then export it. So that way,
So like Eve Online, like
Yes.
big space multiplayer adventure.
Absolutely.
And as far as your data, is it just like your inventory?
No,
or
like
your stats?
No, it's about like your crafting. Like how many spaceships do I craft per day or per whatever? How much did I pay for all of the materials for this? That way I could maximize my profits in order to sell things back. This is a game that, again, literally is spreadsheets in space. Yeah, it has space battles. Yeah, it has a bunch of other things. But really, they have,
you want the real action.
They actually employ a real economist specifically to look at their economy, and they do a quarterly report on on Eve Online's economy.
Wait, it's got its own functioning economy.
Yes. Actual economy that people study. This is a game where CEOs, CIOs, and the C-level suite actually play this game because it is like the real world.
Right. I was aware that there are like CEOs and like ambassadors to kind of like people that you would not expect to be in the video games that are like living the Eve Online life. And so they're pairing up with Excel. So when you go to Excel through Eve, is it like just a special themed page? Like, what was stopping you from already just using Excel and Eve already?
So you had to manually type it all out. You had to be like, all right, I spent this much on my stuff. I spent this much on these crystals. I spent this much on this ore. How much would I have to charge for the ship in order to make a specific amount of profit?
Gotcha.
Whereas now you can just type it all in, or you can export it all out. And then you can just put it directly into your Excel with the formulas and everything else in it already.
Wow.
It's amazing.
That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. No.
I'm sure you did. But it's iconic, sir. But yeah, I loved it.
If you run into an Eve Online player, man, expect to have a fight.
Or at least for them to pay, hire somebody to fight for them.
EVE Online is just one of those games where I'm just so terrified of ever trying. Not because I'm afraid I'll get sucked in. It just seems so impenetrable. The amount of stuff you have to know just to do anything in it. And like I've heard horror stories of I shouldn't even say horror stories. I remember seeing news articles about how these giant battles between all these different clans and tribes or nations, would just go at each other, and there's calculations of how much time was lost, essentially, by how many people's ships were destroyed, how much time they invested in the ships, and they calculated it all up, and it was decades of lives just lost in this fight.
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, they do that. They also do a real world money because you can purchase credits in there using real world money. So I mean, it's not exactly 1-to-1 type of stuff, but you can do that. So people calculate
inflation's happening, and
so people calculate how much money was also lost in specific battles, like hundreds of thousands of real dollars. It's amazing.
Here.
I love the game. I haven't played it in quite a while because, like Josh mentioned, it is very impenetrable if you don't really know what you're doing. But man, it's an amazing game. So you know what? Good for EVE Online. Partnering up with Microsoft.
And good for Excel.
Yeah, good for Excel.
This is the most exciting Excel's been in decades.
Decades.
Well done. This is a boon for Excel.
It is. They need the good press, They need it.
They got to be so excited about this.
So yeah, I think that'll do it for the news. We'll talk about some of the Nintendo stuff and other things next week. We've already gotten a little long-winded into this episode.
I love it.
We still have our final segment, which we haven't done in a little while, which is Dragon of the Week.
So Dragon of the Week is our segment where we highlight people involved in the gaming industry somehow. Just people out there doing the work to just improve the industry that we love. And Josh, you're actually going to be bringing us not just a Dragon of the Week, but Dragons of the Week.
Dragon Knights.
The Dragon Knights.
Oh, they've evolved.
They were Dratinis, and now they're Dragonairs. And then Anyway, I figured since we did a long discussion on video game preservation and video game history, I thought it'd be interesting to just kind of highlight some of the people in the industry who are doing the Lord's work, who are really, they're the boots on the ground, as you would say. I always think of that Brian Reagan joke about boots on the ground. Anyone ever heard that?
I haven't.
Then I'm not going to tell it here and butcher it. So,
All right.
We will
that,
look it
that
up.
is
Look it
like
up.
the worst kind of joke ever. Like, ever heard this joke? Nope. Let's not butcher it now. So I have a handful of people, and there's way too many people, so I'm going to leave out some important people. I promise you. There's so many amazing people in the preservation scene that I think are worth talking about. I will say the first ones I'm going to mention, Frank Sifali and Kelsey Lewin. Frank Sifali is the founder of the Video Game History Foundation. Kelsey Lewin is the co-director with Frank as the director. So they're co-directors of the foundation. Frank is the founder. And they do a podcast called the Video Game History Hour. And on that podcast, it is filled with a litany of incredible people who do really amazing things in the game preservation scene, whether it's they interview other directors of other video game nonprofits that preserve video game history, or they interview people who do documentaries, who do YouTubers, people who do like essays. Like one of my personal favorites from their podcast, and I didn't put it on my Dragons list just because I don't know much about him, but his name is Elijah Lee, and he was able to find the first ever Black female game designer, and her name is Muriel Tramus. I believe she's French. I'm blanking on what country she's initially from, but it's a very interesting episode, and they talked to him about how he went down the rabbit hole to find who the first Black female game designer was. And let me tell you, there's a decent amount of information out there on her, and I don't know if you guys covered her at all as a Dragon of the Week.
We have not. No,
that's my recollection. No, but it sounds pretty awesome.
She's definitely worth checking out. I don't want to spoil some of the stuff that she's done. I would much rather have you guys be able to find it on your own, just because I think it's part of the reward is being able to discover it. So definitely check her out.
Awesome.
Muriel Tramis, Tramis.
Nice.
So anyway, Frank and Kelsey do amazing work. They host these charity streams, not charity streams. They are charity streams. So you buy a ticket, and then all the money goes to their charity. And they do these really amazing streams where, like the most recent one, they had on a lot of the higher ups from Nintendo Power who worked on the Nintendo Power magazine.
Oh, that's so cool.
Gail Tyndon, Howard Lincoln, a lot of the people who are responsible for making the Nintendo Power magazine what it is. And in fact, this gets me thinking, someone I forgot to mention on the list at the top of this, Brian. I'm sorry I'm adding this one in right now because he was on my podcast. His name is Stefan Reese. He is known as the Art of Nintendo Power on Twitter. He collects the artwork that was used for the covers and the art inside of Nintendo Power magazine. And he actually ended up starting his own nonprofit that is preserving the actual artwork of like video games. Like, so for example, he will find the original copy of a cover that an artist did that you would see as the cover of a magazine. Sometimes on Nintendo Power, they would have little clay figures that they would have a picture taken of. He finds those original clay figures, and he preserves them all. And he spends.
Can we ask him to find a certain golden crown?
I know, right? That would be incredible.
Or sword,
even. I'll be happy with with the crown, even just a stone. I'll take anything. Get him on the case.
He does amazing work. So yeah, Stefan Reese and Art of Nintendo Power on Twitter, but he was in that Nintendo Power presentation that Frank and Kelsey put together for the Video Game History Foundation. They also did one with Monkey Island where they had Ron Gilbert on, and they showed the source code of the video game, and it showed how easy it was to develop with it. So anyone who's interested in that type of thing, that you can, in fact, all these you can watch for free on YouTube now. It would just cost money for the time being. So they don't keep it behind a paywall. Like after they wait a couple months and then they release it for free to the public.
Nice.
So they do amazing work. Norm Caruso, also known as the Gaming Historian on YouTube, he is amazing because I would say he has been one of the biggest voices of popularizing video game history and preservation, because he does kind of like documentary style YouTube videos that are very palatable to people who don't know about video games. He makes it in a way that's he can present it in a way that's interesting even to people who don't necessarily like video game history or not even like video games. Pat Contry, I mentioned, he is also known as Pat the NES Punk on YouTube. He doesn't do a lot of Pat the NES Punk stuff anymore, but he is the host of a podcast called the Completely Unnecessary Podcast, also known as the CU Podcast, and they're a weekly podcast. They cover gaming news, but they kind of do it from they focus on a lot of other topics that aren't in the big realm of things. Like we talked about collecting. They're talking about. They've highlighted a lot of the issues with Wada Games, the grading company that grades your games, kind of like what CGC does for comic books, and the scam and how that's like pretty much inflated the retro game market they've artificially inflated the retro game market, and how one of the initial investors in Wada Games is a guy named, I think, Jim Halpert, who is the founder of Heritage Auctions, and Jim Halpert was also someone who rigged the coin collecting market back in the 80s, and he literally has a criminal indictment against him. Like he was convicted of it and stuff like that. So there,
as well he should.
There's a whole rabbit hole that I almost went down and kind of dipped my toe in a little bit there.
You pulled yourself back.
I did. I pulled myself back. But besides that, besides covering things like that on the podcast, he also writes and organizes the NES and Super Nintendo guidebooks. He has these massive textbook-sized books that he puts out of every North American NES game with a little review and screenshots of it, and it's literally like hundreds of pages long. It looks like a textbook from college. It's huge, and he's done one for Nintendo, the original NES, and the Super Nintendo, and he is working on one currently for the N64. So I figured I'd highlight him because it's once again, it's kind of like a coffee table book. It's just nice to look at.
Yeah.
Straight up history book.
Yeah. Did he kickstart these? By
Yes,
any
he
chance?
did.
Okay, then I know exactly what you're talking
of them.
about. Yeah, I think we have one or two of them.
And he'll be doing one for the N64 at some point, I'm assuming, as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Dustin Hubbard.
Can he do one for the Pika? That'd be great.
That would be a short one. It would definitely be a short one.
Yeah.
There was,
It would actually just be the
I got
coasters. It wouldn't be a book. It would just be coasters.
pretty much.
Though,
I mentioned him before. Jeremy Parrish did a Virtual Boy book where he documented all the 13 Virtual Boy releases or whatever. There's only like 13 out there.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Dustin Hubbard from Gaming Alexandria. Gaming Alexandria, I mean, for those who know history, the Library of Alexandria, the legendary library that got burned to the ground. Was it burned or did it get swept up in the sand? I forget. Was it burned?
It was burned. I was pretty sure it was burned. Because it had invaders. Destroyed
we're like,
it.
we don't like your knowledge.
Pretty much.
We don't like your history. It's all wrong.
So he collects scans of, like, he pretty much documents a lot of gaming magazines and tries to get even like the low print like fanzines from like the 80s and 90s that someone would print out and just distribute around a town and stuff like that. Like they try to track stuff down like that. You can follow him on Twitter at Gaming Alexandria. And the last one I wanted to mention, because I've been going for a bit, is Rachel Weil. She is a programmer. I think she's worked for Microsoft. I don't know if she still does or what she's doing currently, but she founded the Famicom Museum, and it's a website that's all devoted to girl games, and not necessarily just games. Like, I thought this was interesting because she kind of is arguing for the idea of girly games are okay. Like, you shouldn't feel guilty about liking quote unquote girly games like Barbie and Mary-Kate and Ashley. Like, just because it's catering to the girl stereotype doesn't mean that it's bad, and doesn't mean that you should be afraid to like it. Even as a feminist, I think she kind of goes into that too. Like, it's okay to look at it and acknowledge the problematic things with it, while also being able to say, yeah, I really like this. So she has a whole webpage called Famicom devoted to documenting games like that.
That's a fascinating mission. I really like that.
Yeah, that's great.
That's why I found her so interesting. I've reached out to her twice to come on my podcast, and she has not responded yet. So I'm going to keep on trying. I'm hopefully going to get her on the show at some point. But those are just some, like, there's so many people. Like, I could have put Jeremy Parrish on here because he does a whole lot. Like I mentioned, Stefan Reese from before. But there's just so many people out there who do this type of amazing work. And just to kind of list them all again, Frank Sifali and Kelsey Lewin of the Video Game History Foundation, Norm Caruso from the YouTube channel Gaming Historian, Pat Contry from the CU Podcast, as well as his YouTube channel Pat the NES Punk. He has those Nintendo and Super Nintendo guidebooks. Dustin Hubbard from Gaming Alexandria, and there's tons of others that do something similar to him. And Rachel Weil from the Famicom Museum. And I guess one last one to add that I think would be interesting, My Life in Gaming. Try and Corey from My Life in Gaming. For those who have never seen that YouTube channel, it's getting the best visual fidelity you can out of your retro consoles. It is fascinating. They talk about how like what all the different video quality signals, oh my gosh, hold on. It's like composite compared to RF, compared to S video, compared to HDMI, compared to RGB, and how all that, HDMI is digital, but you get the idea. All the different analog signals and how they, the different levels of quality and how they even work, how they transmit light across the wires and crap like that. It's incredibly fascinating. So definitely check them out. And I promise, I know I went on a rant there, but that's what I got. Those were my recommendations for the Dragonites of the week.
The Dragonites of the week. Thank you so much. And it's just super uplifting to know that there are people out there, this Avengers style team, this entire heroic roster of people that are out there putting so much work, effort, and passion into preserving games in multiple ways. And it's not easy. It's not just even what you just explained there. We're talking about, getting these older games and preserving the manuals, but they're even preserving the platforms you have to play them on, not just the consoles, but the TVs, the wires, the connections, there's so much even surrounding just the core of what they're preserving. That it really is just remarkable, to say the least.
We don't have time for this. This could have been a topic in of itself. Emulation.
Oh yeah,
what's
right.
the moral gray areas of emulation?
Yeah,
and just without diving into that whole topic, be very clear. Console emulators are completely legal. ROMs of video games are not. That is, in terms of a legality distinction, that is the big thing to note. You can download an NES emulator and it is completely legal. Downloading all the ROMs is a different story. And if you want to know more about that,
noted.
Check out Frank Cifaldi's GDC presentations. He has 2 of them all talking about emulation. Fantastic watches. They're about an hour long and definitely worth your while.
Nice. Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for being on and sharing your love of game preservation with us.
I feel educated and entertained. I got that edutainment going. Thank you so much.
Man. Combine the two so
your own
well.
Sega
so
Pico
well.
right there.
It happened. Yeah, you are our Sega
thank
Pico.
you. I'll take that as a compliment.
But yeah, thanks so much for coming on the podcast and
me.
for chilling with us. I got to say, it's really been fun getting to know you over the past couple of years. I informally regard you as our podcast older brother, even though you're younger than all of us. You are age-wise younger than all of us.
It's true.
Podcast-wise, you've always been there to kind of give us a little pointers here and there, and very grateful for you kind of getting us on your podcast and teaching us a few things as we're continuing to try and evolve in our own content. So we just want to thank you for being on, and also thank you for everything you've helped us with over the past few years.
I haven't done really much of anything, but you're welcome.
We definitely appreciate it. And also, before we leave, we want to mention that if you are listening to us and are missing Manda and her lovely voice, today on your podcast, Still Loading Podcast, Manda's going to be on there. You guys are going to be talking about Monkey Island.
Secret of Monkey Island, yes. We recorded it a couple weeks ago, and it was a fantastic conversation all about the adventures of Guybrush. And in connection with this episode, we do dive into a little bit of the history of the game. Just a little bit of a fun fact to kind of whet people's appetites, or however that word is pronounced.
Nailed it.
Guybrush gets his name because the file extension for the art that the art program that they used was .brush, and they didn't have a name for him yet, so they just called him Guy. So it was literally Guy.brush, and it became Guybrush.
Oh, that's all
Nice.
I can imagine. Tim Schafer and Ron Gilbert just being like, "That's funny," and just like laughing
That's
about
it.
it.
That's
So
it.
there you go. That's a
go with
little
that.
fun fact. It's a teaser.
Ooh,
Well,
a teaser.
Josh, where can the good people find you to find these podcasts and also the other content you put out there?
You can find me almost everywhere at Still Loading Pod on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You can also find me on Twitch that I never ever promote because I'm lazy and I always forget it too. But it's at Still Loading Pod on Twitch as well. You can check it out, all of the stuff I have there. I'm actually doing my first ever panel this month on Saturday, May 28th. I will be at Thy Geekdom Con, which is near Philadelphia, and you can go check that out. If you just search Thy Geekdom Con, if you're in the Philly area and want to check out my panel, I'm doing a brief history of James Bond in video games. So yeah, if you're in the area, check that out. If you like what you heard here, I talk a little bit about history, maybe not as in depth as we did here, but I do bring it up in almost every episode. Episode I'd like to shout out because I'm super proud of it. It's probably one of my favorite episodes I've ever done, and I think it's kind of like an interesting entry point for anyone trying to get into my show. My Final Fantasy draft. So if you basically this episode is what happens when you take fantasy sports and combine it with Final Fantasy. And the results are pretty interesting, if I do say so myself.
It's so good. I was listening to it while exercising, and I had to stop because I was like rooting for certain people to get certain characters, and it almost turned into like a long form Mad Lib where everyone is picking characters and story elements, and then you kind of listed out what each one of these combination of games would be, and each one was just as funny as the next. It's an excellent episode. I fully agree. People should check that out. And an organizational tour de force on your part.
It wasn't too. It was fun. I love doing it.
Awesome. Well, that unfortunately that brings us to the end of this week's episode. You can always find us online everywhere as well. You know, wherever we always are, here, there, everywhere.
But yeah, you can check us out on Twitter, on Instagram, and also on Twitch. Make sure to also look at our Discord where we have a podcast channel discussion channel. So if you like what you heard today and you want to learn more, we'll be discussing it more in depth in the discussion panel over the next week. We can throw some links in there so you can actually check out some of these YouTube videos of these lectures and that we've been mentioning about video game preservation. And that's all at Taste of Dragons. And you can find our link tree on any of those locations.
Absolutely. So as always, my name is Brian.
My name is Troy.
And I am Joe.
And that's Josh.
Hello, I'm Josh.
Heck yeah.
I mean, goodbye. It's the end of the episode.
And we are
The Taste of
Dragons. Have a great week, everyone.
Have a great week. Man, I want to go play that Pika now.
I need a goblet. I need a sweet
You
goblet.
can hang out with
Into a
Mr.
goblet.
Frumble and Mr. Fix-It.
I know.
Taste of Dragons Gaming Podcast, a podcast for everyone's taste.